everybody. My name is Joe Wasserman. I'm a West Hartford resident who's very concerned about peace in the world. I welcome you all to the first edition of Peace is Possible. This will be a series that gives voice to the advocates for peace, for the advocates for a foreign policy that puts peace first. All too often, the mainstream media, or what some people call the corporate media, ignores these voices. These voices are not being heard, and it's critical that the voices for peace be heard in our great nation. Peace is possible if the American people stand up for it. If we all stand up for it and call our Congress people, make it known that we want a foreign policy that puts peace first. I have a special guest today, Wayne Coste, who has been a longtime peace advocate. We are both members of a statewide coalition called Connecticut Peace and Solidarity, which is in the process of organizing its third statewide peace conference. Wayne Coste is a licensed professional engineer with over 45 years of professional experience. He was awarded his Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from the University of Connecticut in 1977. He has been involved with peace and justice movements for about 15 years. He got involved in 2003 during the run-up to the launch of the Iraq War, and since then has been an advocate for peace, has opposed militarism for the last 10 years, and has worked on raising some very legitimate questions about how the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers were destroyed on 9/11. For several years, he was the congressional outreach team leader for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Locally, he is best known for his Iraq Memorial Wall that remembered those who died in Iraq and Afghanistan in what we call the post-9/11 wars, which was part of a weekly vigil from 2004 until 2008. Most recently has been one of the co-conveners of the annual Hiroshima Remembrance event. Wayne, why are peace groups needed in 2018?
Well, thanks for the question and the introduction, Joe. The peace groups are really needed for a lot of reasons. And, you know, as you're reading my introduction, I'm going back to 45 years of professional experience in 1977. That brings me back to the days just after, I went to school during the Vietnam era, just after. And I was at the time, I was a supporter of the war in Vietnam. The media had told me that there's this thing called a Domino Theory that we had to be really concerned about, that was going to destroy our life as the communists in North Vietnam took over South Vietnam, then Cambodia, then Thailand, then Malaysia, then Australia, kind of like the game of Risk, you know, where they've got all the pieces or something like that. And so we were told this by people like, I'm drawing a blank here, McNamara, and who was an advocate for the wars. He was a spokesperson. And of course, what he ended up doing later in his life is saying, well, you know, that really wasn't true. We didn't really even believe it at the time. And kind of sorry, but that's just the way that things went. And no one believed it at the time, but that's what we kept saying, and y'all believed it, right? So a peace group, to get it back to your original question, a peace group is, in a peace movement is needed to basically help uncover and to get better informed about the things that are going on in the world. For example, there's a lot of violence in the world today. Now, we're going to talk more about the foreign policy aspects of that here, but one of the reasons you need a peace group is to promote a better way of interacting with your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones, your fellow countrymen, and the rest of the world. And so these are all really needed because it's a violent world out there. And there are ways of toning the violence down and coming to better understandings when you understand what the needs are of all the people, what you need, and the fact that you don't have to always fear that it's all going to be taken away from you. So peace groups are really important. Now, the issues that the Connecticut Peace and Solidary Coalition have been working on are the hard work that's hard to get people to even address these days. And I'll get into how this has happened over the last 60 years and longer than that. You can actually go back further. But the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition is working on challenging the military, industrial, congressional, and media complex that is currently spending over 60% of our discretionary federal budget on militarism, on war, and preparations for war, or paying the cost of previous wars, the veterans' benefits, the veterans' health care. So there's a lot of money expended in the past on the wars that were still a significant piece of the federal deficit. If you want to say what portion of the federal deficit has been caused by war, it's a large portion of it. For example, the Iraq War was all done off budget. It wasn't part of the budget, it was just extra money they threw in to cover that. The war in Afghanistan was the same way for many years. I don't know how it is now. I think it's all been incorporated into the budget, which has grown to be 60% of the discretionary budget. Mm-hmm. We also have an upcoming expenditure of $1 trillion to modernize nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are, of course, unusable. They are illegal. In 2017, we had a conference at the United Nations that came away with virtually all but 6 countries voting in favor of making nuclear weapons illegal. The United States was, of course, one of the who did not vote in favor of it. So there was a lot of, actually there's quite a few countries that were kind of on our side of the fence, our allies who didn't show up to vote or abstained or something like that. But these nuclear weapons, which we're going to spend $1 trillion on, are not usable. The International Convention, the Rome Convention, has declared effectively them to be unusable from an international legal point of view. And yet we're going to spend $1 trillion modernizing them and, of course, maintaining ours. Now, we can look to the past and see where in the past we used to have a lot more nuclear weapons, but under the Reagan administration, agreements with the Soviet Union at the time, and followed by the Russian Federation following through, a significant number of both our nuclear weapons have been eliminated, turned into nuclear fuel, as well as of ours, as well as the Russians. And actually, somewhere around 10% of all the electricity for many years that we've produced was made from these recycled nuclear weapons. So we can look back to those days and some of those arms control agreements in which we reduced a significant portion of our nuclear stockpile, but we have to look forward to reducing even more. And of course, the nuclear weapons that I'm talking about are just a small portion of the budget. We're looking at spending something like $50 billion a year. I guess that's how we get the $1 trillion in 20 years. But that's a small portion of the $800 billion that we're spending on military current and past, 60% of our discretionary budget. This budget, of course, these expenditures have no benefit to the American people. Mm-hmm. There's not a better school that gets built really because of them. There's not a better jobs. There's not much more happiness. As a matter of fact, there's a lot more despair and unhappiness because of it. Because it teaches us that the way to solve our problems is to use violence. So there's a lot of reasons why you need a peace group to raise some of these issues. And so that's why we're here to do that. Now, there are some things that do come from all this military expenditures. There are jobs at Electric Boat, there's jobs at Pratt & Whitney, there's jobs at a lot of other companies that are making parts for planes, for submarines, for whatever, all sorts of military equipment. But it doesn't benefit the American people per se. So just as a kind of an example, in one of my local community stores, I was talking to the proprietor or the person who was working there, and he said, well, did you hear the news? Donald Trump has just signed a bill that's giving, I forget how many billions of dollars it was, in additional appropriations. And he was really thrilled because now that meant there'd be more jobs at Pratt & Whitney, there'd be more jobs at Electric Boat, and because those are some of the items that were going to be included in that. And I said, well, there's no money for education. There's there's no new money for education, and education is important. There's no money for health care, no additional money for that. That's still something that people have to really struggle with. It's harder here in the United States than it is in almost every other industrialized country. So there's no money for making the world a really better place out of any of that money. Had it been spent on something else, we'd be better off. Mm-hmm. Now the trouble is, to make the economy great, to make America great again, and of course this is going back to the economic theory of almost 100 years ago now, the Keynesian theory of pump priming to keep the economy going, to get it going better. You spend some stimulus money, but in my lifetime, the concept of spending money to make the world, the institutions, a better place for us to live in has not gone very far. What the people in power are willing to do is they're willing to borrow money to build weapons that really can't be used. So we call this military Keynesianism. It's a Keynesian theory with the only thing you spend money on to do the pump priming, improve the economy is military. There is some money that is thrown at infrastructure, new highways. It's not like it's completely missing, but all the money that's being spent on military has no other purposes. And it also, from a peace group point of view, this money is all being spent to create a military environment. And there's this great phrase that says that when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so what is our approach to solving any conflicts that we have in the world? It's to haul out our big hammer. So there's a lot of reasons why addressing this particular issue is important. And I've kind of gone on a little bit and touched on a lot of different topics, but one of the other topics is the violence that is inherent in a militaristic environment. When we have taught people that the way to solve problems is to go get your basic training, go learn how to kill people, close combat, all these really gory things, and then they send them off to war to actually do some of these things, they come back, many of them come back damaged. When I was dealing with veterans with post-traumatic stress syndrome, mm-hmm. The people who would talk about it would say that there's really three types of veterans that come back. Mm-hmm. those who just thought it was a job and, you know, sloughed it off, those that were psychopaths who, you know, didn't, you know, that's why they joined, I guess, so they could go and get the taste of blood. And then there's another group, and I think they described it as being roughly a third. People who were going off to Iraq were all fired up. They were going to get their first taste of blood. You know, that was kind of a big deal from a lot of the veterans that were going over there, as I hear the stories. And the third one does what they've been asked to do, and comes back devastated. The Vietnam War is a really good example of this. The Iraq War is too. As a matter of fact, it may be even more a starker scenario there. But in Vietnam, we have a wall that has, down in Washington, that's got 58,000 names of U.S. soldiers that were killed in Vietnam proper. The people who've studied the issue think that when you look at the number of veterans suicides, either overt, covert, that is drug abuse, alcohol abuse, that we would need, if you wanted to include those kinds of suicides, those, not just the overt ones, but you would need between 6 and 10 more walls. So 300,000 to 500,000 veterans after they came back couldn't cope and ended up dying prematurely. Some at their own hand, and some as a result of their abuse. So there's a whole lot of issues, and Iraq has been another reason. If you go to Japan now, for example, they have not had a standing military for almost 70 years now, since 1945.
Right.
They don't understand why you would go to war. They can't even grapple with why their grandfathers and the great-grandfathers created these great wars. It's just not something that they have in their experience. And so there's a real gulf there, and it's still very deep in the Japanese psyche. There's been a lot of effort right now trying to get them fired up, so to speak, for additional military expenditures, military adventures, things like that. They are prohibited from actually going overseas to get involved in any combat, but there's some movement to try to soften those restrictions. We saw that in Iraq, and so there's a whole lot of reasons why we need peace groups. So I just thought I would raise some of those issues. The groups that can promote some of the interpersonal efforts, such as, you know, how to dialogue with yourself, how to treat domestic violence, how to get along, how to have anti-bullying. You can get funding from organizations to do this kind of stuff. But you can't get any funding to do the types of work that we're trying to do in our peace group that will try to make the world a livable place, not just for us, but for all of the rest of humanity. So it's really important to be able to try to raise these issues and get into the political discourse, because right now it's impossible. If you turn onto any of your mainstream media, you're not going to hear any discussions about the trauma that our military adventurism has caused. We're going to, if you listen to Afghanistan, you hear that, well, you know, that war's been going on for how long now? It's the longest running war that we've ever had. So we went in there and we defeated the Taliban, but they haven't gone away, and there's got to be some reasons for it. many things that are outside of our political discourse. Well, why haven't we been able to solve the Afghanistan problem? What is it that we're missing? Of course, one of the reasons is that some of our greatest allies, Saudi Arabia, really kind of like the Taliban. They've been supporting them. As a matter of fact, they trained them back in the 1980s, late 70s, through the 80s. So our best allies are part of this. And if you don't think that they're our best allies, can you think of another country in which you have a total dictatorship, in which they execute people based on religious preferences, don't tolerate any political discourse? That's Saudi Arabia. And who did we just go sell $150 billion worth of weapons to? Who's fighting in Yemen in the most brutal way?
Mm-hmm.
They're our best buddies. Qatar's not actually part of this. The UAE, Qatar seems to have been cut off from that particular group for a number of reasons. But these are our staunchest allies in the area. Can you imagine any other country behaving this way and being coddled? No. And in fact, they are major funders of the rebels and ISIS in Syria. These are our guys, and somehow our weapons end up in their hands. So it's a lot of funky things going on there. But you don't see this discourse in the media. So part of what the peace groups need to do is raise these issues and to educate ourselves and educate others. So that's my kind of long-winded, windy reason for why you need peace groups because you're not going to learn what you need to know from listening to the media. You're going to hear only a piece of it, and what you're going to hear is probably so fractured that it's not going to make any sense, and you're going to be confused, and then you're just going to trust them because they're the only story in town, and they keep repeating it.
Thank you. Tell us about the free conference coming up on November 10th. Okay,
so the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition is going to be having a conference at Middlesex Community College. It's endorsed by the Congress of Connecticut Community Colleges, as well as many others, smaller groups, but they're actually helping to organize this at some level. And they'll be providing lunch. That's the main thing that they're doing. And the conference is going to be at the Middlesex Community College from 10 a.m. to 5. It's Chapman Hall, Middlesex Community College. And the overall goal is to educate people about the need for peace, as well as mobilize people for action, and so we can actually achieve those aims. Some of the speakers have been confirmed. One of them is Maurice Carney. He's from the Friends of the Congo. And you might say, well, what does this have to do with a peace conference? Well, I'll simply say that I've heard him speak. He's going to be talking about the militarism that is causing troubles, our militarism, which is causing troubles all throughout the continent of Africa. Africa right now is being courted because of weak governments. It's being courted by many different competing interests. It was the target of European colonialism back in the 1800s, early 1900s. They've all got their independence, so to speak, but they've never been able to really establish themselves. And so filling in the void have been a lot of covert military actions by proxies. And what a proxy is someone that you will fund, you will provide weapons to. And where do those weapons come from? A lot of times they come from our arsenals. But there's a lot of people, a lot of governments there that are trying to resist these, and they find that whenever they resist, there's all these armed groups that come up, and some of the battles, the conflicts are extraordinarily violent. Congo is one of them. And it is at the confluence of rare metals that are in the eastern Congo. That's mostly what the fighting has been about, or who's going to get them, because some of them are some of the largest deposits of, I think it's molybdenum, but that may not be the right one, maybe cobalt. But there's some rare minerals there that are valuable, and they're being fought over. And because there's weak governments, they rely on, or they're induced to take our aid, which comes with a military presence, which then puts our boots on the ground there. And this is partly in response to other geopolitical events, such as the Chinese investing a lot of money in Africa so that they can have access to some of these resources, hopefully on a more up and up perspective, so that they are actually buying them, and there's a kind of a fair trade. But our policies have been driven by trying to get these, and we've been using our military to do a lot of that. So Maurice is going to be talking about some of the ways that our militarism has spread into Africa. When we talk about our military budget here in the United States, we don't usually think about how it's going to be affecting people in these far-flung countries, and what kind of unrest is going to result from that.
How can people contact us? How can people contact the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition?
Well, I actually don't have the email for you, but you want to give it?
The website.
Oh, you can. You can go to our website, which is hopeoutloud.org. www.hopeoutloud.org. You don't want to hope in silence, because if you hope in silence, no one knows that you're there, and so we want people to hope out loud. It's part of a song by one of our local activists who did a really good job of advocating for peace and justice around the world.
And if people want to carpool down to the conference or to Peace and Solidarity meetings, you could reach me at joewass64@yahoo.com or 860-561-1897.
Say that again.
860-561-1897 or joewass64@yahoo.com if you have further questions or would like to participate in the conference or Peace and Solidarity.
Right, great.
Well, thank you for viewing this program and for being open to perhaps a different way of looking at the world than what we're getting, I think, in the mass media. Hope you could join us next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.